At a speech in Berlin in 2022, Chair Khan told an audience that the challenges facing antitrust today were, quote, the result of a choice made 40 years ago to follow the misguided philosophy of people like Robert Bork. In other words, according to Chair Khan, the prevailing view over the last 40 years, a bipartisan view, shared over more than 20 Congresses, 6 presidential administrations, and adopted and developed by all 50 states in their enforcement, is now somehow wrong. Consider that over those 40 years, the U.S. economy grew from about a $3 trillion annual economy to $25 trillion and was the single greatest period of wealth creation in human history. But everyone who oversaw economic policy for those 4 decades, according to the chair, was wrong. She knows better. She's trying to usher in a radical departure from the norms that made the American economy great to a system where her and her cronies have unchecked power over business practices in our country, untethered from any reasonable reading of precedent or statutory law. So we should ask now, over the 2 years into her tenure, how has her approach to antitrust been playing out as she heads one of those critical agencies in our government? The short answer is that it's been a disaster. She's pushed investigations to burden parties with vague and costly demands without any substantive follow-through or, frankly, logic for the requests themselves. She's centralized the decision-making at the commission within her office, eliminated any pretext of due process or transparency in that decision-making. Her approach is best characterized as one of intimidation followed by inaction. The best example of this, which was only brought to light because of our work on the Weaponization Select Committee, was her targeted harassment of Twitter. After Mr. Musk bought the company and following pressure from Democrat senators, left-wing activist groups, the FTC issued over 350 requests for information from Twitter. These requests included asking for every communication about Mr. Musk inside the company, and most troubling, for information about Twitter's work with journalists, working to shed light on the government-driven censorship practices that existed at, and I think in some cases still exist at big tech. In fact, we got a great court decision last week who talked about this, how pervasive this effort was, and a preliminary injunction from that federal court in the Western District of Louisiana. Just this morning, though, in a filing in federal court, we have learned that the situation is actually even worse than we could have imagined. This wasn't harassment, it was a shakedown. The FTC, as is common practice pursuant to the consent order, required Twitter to hire an independent assessor whose legal obligation is to be truly independent and objective, not for one party or another. Well, it turns out objectivity was not what the Federal Trade Commission was interested in here. Here's what the filing said about Ernst & Young, the independent assessor hired in this matter. Quote, the FTC was so adamant with Ernst & Young conveying that this is absolutely what you will do, and this is going to occur, and you'll produce a report at the end of the day that would be negative about Twitter, that senior Ernst & Young leaders feared that if Ernst & Young resigned as the independent assessor, the FTC would take exception to their withdrawal and create other challenges for Ernst & Young over time. This is not conjecture from Twitter. This is from sworn testimony of the independent assessor in the deposition itself, taken just last month. This is outrageous. This is unacceptable. And it's the kind of behavior that occurs in banana republics, not in the United States of America. And so it's no wonder Chair Khan has no interest in providing information to the people's representatives in the Congress, to the people on this committee when we ask for it. To date, the FTC has not fully complied with a single request for documents from this committee. And because of her mismanagement, not even her own staff is impressed with Chairman Khan's leadership. In 2020, the last year under the Trump administration, 87% of FTC employees agreed that senior leaders maintain high standards. Under Chair Khan, that figure fell to 53% in 2021, has declined even further to 49% in 2022. In 2020, 83% of surveyed FTC employees agreed that they have a high level of respect for the FTC senior leaders. Again, under the chairman, that figure plummeted to 49%. And these numbers were before it was revealed recently that the chair was advised by FTC's Ethics Council to recuse herself from a major case. She did not recuse herself and then appears to have misled Congress about taking that advice. We have a lot of questions today to get through. We look forward to the response from the chairman of the FEC. Ms. Khan, earlier, and I believe the gentleman from Arizona brought this up, you said people's privacy is paramount. I couldn't agree more. And as we talked earlier, I do think there's bipartisan support to deal with that, this sweeping up of data that happens, and scarier yet is FBI purchasing that data. So that is of paramount importance. But I would say the First Amendment's of paramount importance too. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
And then the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, asked you, what's disinformation? And you said you don't really have an opinion on that. Is that a fair assessment of your answer?
As part of our job at the FTC, we're focused on deception and fraud and that sort of thing.
Well, you wrote a couple years ago in a Law Review article, digital businesses such as Twitter disserve their users by facilitating the spread of disinformation. What were you talking about there then? What's disinformation?
I'm happy to take a closer look at the material you're mentioning, but as part of our work at the FTC, we've seen how fraud and scams can sometimes proliferate on these social media websites. We've launched an inquiry to try to understand, why are some of these crypto scams really proliferating on these sites, and what can we be doing?
These are the first two sentences in the introduction of the piece you wrote, again, just a couple of years ago. Digital businesses such as Twitter disserve their users by facilitating the spread of disinformation. Who decides what's disinformation?
From the FTC's perspective, it's deception and fraud.
No, that's fine. You can keep using synonyms, but I want to know who decides that it's deception, who decides that it's fraud, who decides that it's disinformation. In this case, you're talking about social media companies and what gets posted on their platform. Who decides what's disinformation, what isn't?
So, Congressman, again, at the FTC, we're focused on fraud and deception. There is a legal standard about what constitutes fraud. Again, this is about...
But you didn't say fraud or deception, you said disinformation. And my concern is, again, and it's probably the third time I've talked about this, but the sustained attack on Twitter when the ownership there changed and the platform was committed to not taking down speech, not taking down posts, allowing the sharing of information, and not censoring information. And we just had a major decision last week from a court in Louisiana, a federal court in Louisiana, where they said the government was, in fact, pressuring big tech companies to censor, and big tech companies were willing to go along with it. Now we have a change there, and you're going after the one company that's changed how they're doing things. That's what concerns me, particularly in light of the fact that you just wrote about this a few years ago, saying this is what goes on.
Congressman, I'm glad to have the opportunity to clarify some issues here. So we at the FTC have no view on who should or should not own a company. All we care about is that the company is following the law. That's really what our focus is.
We've covered that ground. I want to know about disinformation and who decides what's disinformation. You think the government should decide that?
Congressman, the way I see it is concentrations of economic power, including over speech platforms and communications platform, that it's that concentrated power and the ability to pick who gets heard, who doesn't get heard, to make these types of decisions. That, I think, is concerning to all of us, and the FTC's job is to be promoting...
You know what kind of speech was getting censored? Do you know what the court said last week? Have you read the opinion, by the way?
I have not. It did not concern the FTC.
You know what kind of speech was getting censored? You know what the court said? Conservative speech. Conservative speech was all, the suppression was virtually all conservative. This is not Jim Jordan talking about, this is not Republicans on the Judiciary Committee talking, this is the federal judge who had the facts, 86 pages of facts, and put the facts and the law together in this opinion, strong opinion, which said it was a conservative speech that was getting censored and labeled as disinformation.
So, Congressman, I fully understand why, given the extreme concentration of power over some of these speech platforms, why people would be afraid and worried about censorship. I couldn't agree more that when you have a handful of people making decisions about what gets seen, what doesn't get seen, who gets heard.
And you think the remedy to that is for government to decide what's disinformation and what's not?
Congressman, at the FTC, our job is to promote competition. More competition means more people making these decisions, and I think that can alleviate some of the concerns about censorship that you're sharing.